Hello again, I am Blunty, and this, if you've just come back from a lovely trip to an especially secluded cave on one of the moons of Saturn, is Fallout 4. And this is specifically Fallout 4 running on the ROG Ally handheld PC, and I've chosen this as an especially interesting test case for three major reasons. The first one is, sometime this year, Bethesda will be releasing a so-called next-gen update for Fallout 4, for free. It'll be available for Xbox Series X and S users, PlayStation 5 and Windows users, and will include, allegedly, performance mode features for high frame rates, quality features for 4K resolution gameplay, bug fixes, yes, they're still fixing bugs in Fallout 4, and much like the anniversary edition of Skyrim, will include a pile of bonus Creation Club content to further expand the content available while you're playing the main game. The second reason is, there's about to be a renewed public interest in Fallout in general with the incoming live-action TV series from Amazon, which, if it is any good, and by all leaks and reports so far, it looks the part at least, like the cyberpunk anime before it, it has a pretty good chance to bring people back to the Fallout games or indeed introduce them to the games for the first time. The cyberpunk anime did tremendous things for the player numbers on Cyberpunk 2077. Wonder what's going to happen with Fallout. The TV Series 2 is slated for sometime this year. I imagine the series and the next-gen Fallout 4 update will probably be intended to launch very close to one another, so they're not announcing dates until they're sure they can get both out at the same time, or close to really capitalize on the marketing. As for the third reason, well, in between absolute compulsive sessions of play with Tears of the Kingdom over the last week on my Nintendo Switch, I've been carving out some time to continue my gameplay testing on the Ally as we lead into the new PC handheld's launch in a few weeks. And in large part, what I've been testing has fallen right in line with the expectations my original review set. This thing can churn most games pretty damn good. But I've started turning my eye towards games that are, in particular, a little tricky to run on the Ally's biggest name competitor, the Steam Deck. Comparisons between these two products are not only interesting and useful, considering they each represent a watermark standard in handheld PC gaming, but also the comparisons are inevitable, as tiresome as some of the discourse these comparisons trigger is already becoming, echoing the kind of mind-numbing tedium of pointless arguments more common amongst the console fanboy fetishist plebeians. Come on, PC Master Race people, we're better than this, aren't we? We must be. In any case, that does bring us to Fallout 4, and the third reason we're looking at it here on the Ally, because it is one of a few games I've been poking at that do in fact run on the Steam Deck. I'm not going out of my way to pick games that sort of don't run on the Steam Deck at all because of the anti-cheat or something. I want to do a fair comparison here. So yeah, Fallout 4 does run on the Steam Deck, but it does also require more than the usual sacrifices to make it playable. It is a problem game. I found a few sets of suggested settings for Steam Deck. They're the usual mix of medium and high settings that are common for this task, so that's where I started on the Ally. However, it seems if Steam Deck users want a native resolution, that's 800p for them, they're looking at a 30 FPS experience, and for some playstyles in this game, especially the ones that lend themselves to controllers rather than keyboard and mouse gameplay, 30 FPS is fine. Not ideal, but fine. That's what the thing ran at on the consoles it originally came out for anyway. But to get up to a more ideal 40, or better yet 60 FPS, they are running at sub-native resolutions, and it seems 600p is the sweet spot there. Either that, or they stay native and turn down a few more settings to get the frame rate up. So that kind of edge case balancing act makes this an interesting comparison. At least hopefully it makes it interesting. You're still watching, aren't you? Have you done the thumb yet? Left a comment? Now, Fallout 4 and its underbelly of the aged and creaking Creation engine running it are hardly bastions of elegant and refined efficiency. Even on full-fat desktop PCs, this game doesn't exactly run smooth all the time. So, even with the extra grunt of the Ally, I'm not expecting to lock in on the 60 FPS target, but I'm hoping to get near enough. And for those who don't know, it's really not a good idea to run this game at an uncapped frame rate beyond 60 anyway. The engine that runs it is so old and so busted that there are certain aspects, like the physics engine for example, that start breaking if you try and run the game at above 60 FPS, sometimes quite dramatically broken. But I have got it unlocked here because it makes it easier to see what kind of performance overhead I'm dealing with. So just keep that in mind, that at 60 FPS cap is the usual way to play, and in fact the game is hard-coded to lock there, usually by default. I've had to modify a file to unlock it to enable me to run beyond 60 FPS. And as you might have been noticing, I did quite a bit of my testing in and around Goodneighbor and the surrounding area, one of the more densely packed and classic performance problem parts of the Fallout 4 map. So if I can get it to run good here, it should be good for the rest of the game. Now, as you've been seeing, as I've painted the scene here, the Ally can indeed sit happily at 50 to 60 FPS. And in easy areas, like indoors especially, it'll reach to the 70s easily. And all of this is at a nice clean native 1080p, and the settings I settled on after a bunch of fiddling are on screen for your reference now. Couple of things to note. You might see some screen tearing in the recording, but do note, thanks to the Ally's FreeSync premium compatible screen, I see zero such tearing on the device itself, regardless of frame rate. I love FreeSync. And a similar qualification thing goes for having the anti-aliasing turned off. If you're watching this on like a TV or full screen on a PC monitor or whatnot, it might look a bit jaggy to your eyes. But again, thanks to the pixel density of 1080p on the Ally's 7-inch screen, it actually looks really quite clean and indeed crisp. I would happily play this game at these settings. Dips never reach past the mid-40s, and again, for the kind of gameplay style that lends itself to controller-based play in this game, that will do just fine indeed. But should you want to absolutely nail yourself to 60 FPS, your gameplay style is a bit more rapid fire, if you will, you can totally do that too. Popping down to 720p to give us more headroom is the only trick. The settings remain unchanged, well, except for one setting, because as you might be seeing there at this resolution, even with a 7-inch screen's pixel density, you really can't hide the crimes of the jaggies anymore. They're not pleasant to look at. So, with TAA turned on, the best anti-aliasing option this game has to offer, which is just sad, but that's what it has, at least without mods, but I'll come back to that thought in a minute. Once more, as a reminder, depending on how you're watching this, it might look pretty soft, because TAA is not especially great. But again, on the Ally's screen itself, it is actually acceptable. I'd call it acceptable. Not as crisp as native 1080p, of course, but it does present pretty clean and reasonably well detailed. Certainly enough for an unfettered gameplay experience. Actually, on the note of resolutions, just while we're talking about it, one more issue the Steam Deck has with this janky-ass game. The Steam Deck's native resolution is 1280 by 800, which is a 16 by 10 aspect ratio, not the 16 by 9 standard most monitors outside of some laptops have. And Fallout 4 has a few visual bugs that arrive with trying to run it at 16 by 10 or other oddball aspect ratios, including a rather disruptive one when it comes to using the map. There are workarounds and whatnot for this, and they're reasonably easy to implement, but it's still a pain in the ass, and one that the Ally does not have, because it, of course, runs at a standard 16 by 9 1080p. So whether or not you want to score that as a point in the Ally's favour, up to you. I think it is. Less fussing, more gaming, good stuff. In any case, as you've been seeing at 720p and these mixed high and medium settings, we get a nicely presented game, and it's very comfortably above the 60 FPS we want to lock it down to. It did very, very rarely drop into the mid-50s, and at least once I saw it hit like 49 for a very small spike. But for the most part, it will nail to 60 easily enough, and frankly, with this game and its creaky foundations, that's about as good as you can hope for. Now, there is a mod that allows the use of fancier upscaling tech, namely DLSS, XESS, and rather more importantly for the AMD-based Steam Deck and ROG Ally, FSR. And I did try to test it out for this video, but for whatever reason, I just couldn't get it to run. I could get it installed, but I couldn't get the interface to pop up, no matter what I did. Fallout 4 has a weird thing, if you've got a controller connected, it doesn't recognize the keyboard sometimes, so I did do a workaround for that, but I still couldn't get the damn thing to run. I couldn't get it to give me an interface so I could turn it on, so I could adjust the settings, yada yada yada, and I burnt 2 friggin' hours trying to get the damn mod to work without any success at all. Plenty of other people do report success with this mod. It's reasonably new and only came out in February this year, but frankly, I ran out of patience for fiddling with it for now. Suffice to say, if this mod would have run for me for these experiments, I'd have expected to take that TAA 720p image and make it even crisper and cleaner using FSR 2.0. Probably we can get away with quality mode, which is 80% scaling if I remember correctly. There's also performance mode, which is 50% scaling. But either way, you know, FSR is way better than basic pitch upscaling with TAA applied. So, let us all hope collectively that the next-gen update for Fallout 4 includes FSR upscaling natively. Or at the very least, doesn't completely break the entire modding scene in half. Looking at you, Skyrim Anniversary Edition. Oh, and if you're wondering, by the way, on the note of Skyrim, I did test that today as well, more briefly than Fallout, and it runs great. In fact, it runs a little bit better, because it is an easier game to run than Fallout 4 is, and I can push settings a bit higher and still maintain a 1080p native at mostly 60 FPS. Both of these games, like I said, share a nearly identical game engine. It's just Skyrim is a little bit less visually ambitious, so it's easier to push it a little bit harder. So, Now we've got another comparison point between the ROG Ally and the Steam Deck to talk about, and a watermark for comparing against the next-gen update of Fallout 4 when that releases, because I will, of course, be testing that again on the Ally when that arrives. When it arrives, if it arrives, whenever that is. I wonder if Bethesda will make things better or like much, much worse, because there's always a coin toss with those lunatics. Sometimes they make things better, sometimes they just ruin everything forever, or at least for several months while they're pissing off modders. Oh, and hey, on the subject of Bethesda and Creation Engine games, and so I can say the word to get it in the SEO, Starfield runs on a modified version of this same game engine. How modified it is, we don't really know the full details of that, but it's a modified version of the Creation Engine that Starfield runs on. Starfield runs on a Creation... I'll stop. So it will be interesting to see how well that runs on devices like the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally, and sort of how big a gap of acceptable performance there is going to be there. Is it going to leave the Steam Deck behind? Because if it can only just do Fallout 4 acceptably at like 600p at 60 FPS, what is Starfield going to do? Is the Ally even going to be good enough for that game? We'll have to wait and see. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Hopefully this has been interesting for you. I am Blunty. I will catch you next time. And thank you as always to the patrons scrolling up above there. Catch you next time.